Yeah, okay, much better. Okay, good morning, and my name is Alina Trapovo. I am here on behalf of my colleague, Professor Maria Lilla Montagnani, who unfortunately could not be today with us, but we come from the same institutions. I know of her work, she knows of mine, and I kind of foresaw this. So I'm very, very pleased and honored to chair this panel. We have a very full panel today, and without taking much of the time, I would introduce each speaker, and then each speaker will have 15 minutes. And at the end, we'll take questions and answers. But first, we start with Kamil Mamak, who comes from the, I hope I pronounce it correctly, Jagiellonian University. He has a very interesting profile. He has a PhD in law and is currently a PhD candidate in philosophy. So he brings very interesting different perspectives to this panel. He's an author of the blog Criminal Future, where the blog looks at law, philosophy, and technology. And among the many other interesting things he's involved with, he's a member of the board at the Krakow Institute of Criminal Law. So without taking much of your time, I give you the floor on the topic of ethical dilemmas and self-driving cars, the perspective of criminal law.
So my name is Kamil, as was said, and I'm a lawyer and philosopher. I started to study philosophy just after finishing law, and it's amazing, but at the same time it's very frustrating, especially for someone who is finishing law. Because in law we are taught that every question has an answer. That philosophy is completely opposite. They are not focusing on answers. So one of the warming tasks at the beginning of the philosophical study was the trolley problem, one of the most hated slides at the conference about the ethics and machines. And it was at the beginning of my philosophical studies. The professor asked us to say something about that, who should die or what we should react. Every person who was in the class said what they think, and he said, okay, so let's move on. And I asked him what is the correct answer, and he said there is no and there will never be. But apparently after the self-driving car started to be an issue in the world, a lot of people try to use that kind of trolley problem to solve that ethical dilemmas. As probably everyone at this room know, that there was a program run by MIT Moral Machine that we could decide who should die. Recently there was published article with the result of that survey, and some of them. One of the results was that there are differences depends on the world on the country in which we live. But as I said, at the philosophy there is a view that it's not solvable and it will never be solvable in the future, because it's connected with the morality and ethics, and it's not a matter of solving something. But when I was finishing my PhD in law, my supervisor found very interesting the problem of the autonomous cars and to some ethics problems, and he asked me to give some answers on that, because he's a lawyer and he was engaged in the legislation, and he said that we have to do something. And I said to him that it's impossible, because we are talking about that in the philosophy for hundreds of years, and he said that we don't have time for the philosophers to solve that, and he forced me to write something. So what I will be presenting here is that the result of that forced task that was put on me. So I came from the criminal law, and when we were at the conference in Jerusalem, one of the presenters said that we don't have to care about the accidents because it will be too rare, and we don't have to worry about. But from the perspective of law, even if there will be one crash, we have to know how to solve it and who is responsible for that. And I think there has to be some kind of regulation. We have to put some guidelines for the car makers to accept that, to have some solutions. And I looked, when my supervisor asked me to do that, I looked at it from the perspective of criminal law, and I was trying to find some hints, something which could help me to say something which could be not trivial in that area. And I found something which I think is interesting. So after 9/11, in many countries there was legislations which wants to solve the problem of hijacked plane, and there was also a novelization in the Polish criminal law. The Polish law, there was the new provision in the air law in Poland. So it's called, if there is an information that civil aircraft is used for illegal activities, and in particular as a means of terrorist attack from the air, this aircraft can be destroyed. So this is kind of algorithm. If there is some threat that there will be some casualties, we could just kill all people who are inside that plane. And Polish Supreme Court at the beginning asked Constitutional Tribunal to decide whether it's constitutional or not, because Supreme Court has that kind of feeling that it's not unconstitutional. It's a very hard word to say. So the Polish Constitutional Tribunal ruled that it's not constitutional. It's not a condition imposed by the interference of public authorities with the rights of the citizens. So a Constitutional Tribunal said that it's a very hard question and it's a very hard task, but he made a very strong statement on that topic. They said that the Constitutional Tribunal has no doubt that human life is not subject of valuation on account of its age, state of health, its expected duration, or due to any other criteria. Every man, including the passengers of an aircraft in the airspace of the state, has the right to protect the life through this state. Granting the state the right to kill them, even defending the life of the other people, is denial of this right. So if you will go back to the Trolley program, if we will go back to that scenarios which are presented by the MIT, you could say that we were evaluating the human lives. We could decide whether the old people should die or young people should die, but it's unacceptable from the perspective of the law, because it's against some democratic values which are important for us. So from that perspective, we could say that there is no sense to ask such kind of question, because it will never be acceptable in the democratic states. So the other view from the perspective of criminal law on the problem of self-driving cars and the crash is the institution which is called the state of necessity. So the state of necessity occurs when in a given situation the individual is forced to choose some kind of alternative, lose and good and one good and save another good threatened by it, or not to lose it. So when someone is committing some crime, we think that he has committed a crime, he could give us an excuse that he's not actually committed a crime because he was acting in the state of necessity. And the state of necessity has a couple of conditions. One of them is the proportionality of goods. So we have to say which good is much important and which good we could protect instead of others. And proportionality could be understood in two ways, as a proportionality of goods or proportionality of damages. So it's also important from the perspective of our problem, self-driving cars, because we have to decide whether we are looking at the damages which will be caused by the accident or by the goods. And all of the people who are writing about that topic are saying that in the case of such values like life, we don't have to look at the proportionality of damages, but we have to look at the proportionality of goods. What does it mean? So if we have a situation that there is 1 people in threatened and 5 people, we just don't say that 5 means is more important than 1, because we are looking at some abstract essence of that values. So we are looking at in one hand we have human life, and the other hand we have human life. So we just can't say that the life of 5 is more important of 1 life. So in that situation, we will go back to our problem of self-driving cars. It will not be acceptable to say that 1 person is more important. The 5% is more important than 1. And there is a very interesting argument. Otherwise, people in a minority should be denied the right to necessary defense, which would amount of requiring them to sacrifice their lives to save more people. So in every situation, every person who is in danger, even if it will cost the death of more people, has the right to self-defense, has the right to be protected by the law. So the last thing which I would like to talk is the Self-Defense Act, so the changes of the algorithms. So sometimes we are saying that the guidelines with the scenario will cause that we will put some guidelines to the algorithm, and it will behave as we decided before. But from the perspective of criminal law, it will be always legal to change that algorithms, to change it to the selfish mode, to protect people who are inside the car instead of sacrificing people who are outside the car, because the criminal law and the law can't just protect, have to protect some self-preservation instinct, and it's that kind of values which is unacceptable to deny. So every person has the right to protect themselves. So even if we will decide that there is some kind of good solutions, or we should protect, for example, people who are pedestrians, there will be always acceptable to harm our own car to make it selfish. It's connected with some kind of heroism. Of course, we want to have that every person in the world could be a hero, but it's not acceptable by law to demand to do that by every people. So one cannot demand heroism from people, even though we are witnesses to it on a daily basis. The Act recognizes the existence of a self-preservation instinct, a barrier that cannot be transgressed. So the result of that thinking is very sad from one perspective, because it means that if you have more money, better car, we will have better algorithms. But I think there's nothing that we can do with that, and we have to accept that. Nowadays it looks the same, but we are not thinking that way. For example, if someone is richer, has richer, bigger car, which have more safety features inside, and we are accepting that. Poor people has poorer car, and in situation where there is a collision, it's more likely to happen that the person who is poorer will die in that crash instead of the person who is richer. So the same situation has to be accepted in case of self-driving cars. So thank you, and if you have the next question, I will answer it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, you saved us some 3 minutes, but we can take questions at the end, because I think the topics in this panel are very well molded with each other, and in that case, I think the discussion will be more fruitful at the end. So now I invite, I hope I pronounced the names correctly, Dalit Ken-Dror Feldman. She is, again, from a very, very interesting background, because the discussion here, we bring different perspectives, but she has a legal as well as computer science background. So she has degrees from the University of Haifa, and her interests focus on law, technology, and legal ethics, including regulation of technologies such as artificial intelligence, unmanned aerial vehicles, and all these interesting things that we all care about, and that's why we're here for this panel. She's the legal supervisor of the Law, Technology, and Cyber Clinic, so I guess that brings you very interesting examples to share with us. And I give you the floor on the topic of autonomous vehicles and criminal liability challenges.
Thank you very much, Alina, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful conference. It's very inviting, this conference. Today my talk will be about the autonomous vehicles and criminal liability challenges, and this research was conducted by as you said, the Law, Technology and Cyber Clinic at the Haifa University. So, autonomous vehicles differ in degrees of automation. The Society of Automotive Engineers International suggested in 2014 6 levels of driving automation. These levels are differ by dependence on human driving. For example, level 0 refers to no automation at all, whereas level 1 is referred to driver assistance. In level 0 to 2, a human driver monitors the driving environment, whereas in level 3 to 5, automated driving system monitors the driving environment. When we talk about autonomous vehicles, we refer to level 3 and above. Autonomous vehicles are based on artificial intelligence and machine learning. Therefore, we assume that the more hours a car accumulates on real roads, the better it performs. During its training process, as well in real life, autonomous vehicles might be involved in car accidents. Even if it's just one, it's still a car accident, and indeed it already happened. On January 20, 2016, a driver of a Tesla car was killed in China when the car crashed into the back of a road sweeping truck. On May 7, 2016, a driver of a Tesla car was killed in an accident in Florida when the car was in self-driving mode. Again, in March 2018, we witnessed another deadly Tesla car accident in California. However, during 2018, again in March, we witnessed a new kind of autonomous vehicle accident. This time, the victim was a pedestrian who crossed the road in Arizona. An Uber car was involved in this accident, not Tesla. You see, there is a difference. These accidents clarify well why we should find a legal solution to criminal liability where a criminal offense is committed by an autonomous vehicle. In order to impose criminal liability, the existence of 2 elements is required. 1, the existence of criminal conduct, and 2, general knowledge of intent with respect to the behavioral element, except in enhanced liability, as we will see later on. In addition, regarding the first element, sometimes proof of a certain result is also required. The choice who can be the offender in autonomous cars includes the car, the owner, driver or passenger, the software company or the car manufacturer, and of course the hacker. In order to decide whom society should blame as a criminal offender, we need to keep in mind basic justifications of criminal law. Among them we can find proportionate punishment, deterrence, rehabilitation and education. As Professor Gabriela Levy, in his article I Robot, I Criminal, talked about 3 models that can fit AI. We can see the direct liability model, in other words, blame the car, as you maybe suggested, blame the car, but we'll see that it's not true. Offense by proxy is the second model, which means that the user, the car manufacturer or the software company send the car to commit an offense. And the third model, the natural and reasonable consequences, if a person should have foreseen the result of his action or his failure to act, he should be found as liable of committing a criminal offense. Some states, such as California, in its torts law, decided that during the experimental period, the driver is to blame under the civil law. However, in stage 5, as we saw before, of the autonomous vehicles, it can be hardly justified or be an option, not in civil law and not, as we will see, in criminal law. In enhanced liability offenses, for example, Section 22 of the Israeli Penal Code of 1977, there is usually an option that the offender will prove that he acted without criminal intent and without negligence and did everything possible to prevent the offense, as Kamil suggested before, try to avoid the accident itself. The person who argues this, of course, bears the burden of proof. In stage 5 of the autonomous vehicles, the passenger will not be able to control the car, and hence the basic principles, as we saw before, of criminal law are not met. Moreover, if we would try to blame the passenger, that may be a child, an invalid, and drunk, or any person that does not possess a driving license or cannot drive, we would just pull the carpet underneath the whole idea behind the autonomous vehicles. To put the blame on the car manufacturer or the software company is more logical according to the basic principle, as we saw before, of the criminal law. The car manufacturer and the software company can still prove that they acted without criminal intent and without negligence and did everything possible to prevent the offense. Maybe they will take Kamil's research and just implement it into the car, and then they will just say it's justified because the algorithm that Kamil gave us told us that it is fine. The same logic is relevant also to other categories of criminal offense as well, with relevant modifications, of course. Due to lack of time, I will not talk about other offenses, but the same logic just refers to these offenses as well. The car owner could be maybe blamed with criminal offense just if he changed the software or hardware to an unverified version or did not install all the relevant patches that he should have. In addition, in this situation, it should be proved that the change falls into the natural and reasonable consequences model in order to convict the car owner or the person who changed or failed to install the patches. In the experimental period of cars in stage 3 and 4 that we saw before, where the passenger is still considered as a driver that should handle difficult situations, the driver will be liable as an offender according to the current criminal system. The driver can still prove that he acted without criminal intent and without negligence and did everything possible to prevent the offense, or that he did not have enough time, for example, as we saw in the Uber car. She had just 6 seconds, and what can we do in 6 seconds? I don't know. They have to decide. The court is still on. And the car, or maybe the car was hacked. So you can prove also that the car was hacked and it was not you that controlled the car. If the driver acts when the car does not alert, that means that he takes over the car even though he doesn't need to, then he should be convicted or not according to the current criminal law. And I think that we will hear from Karni later on about the level of proof in torts, and maybe we can think about the level of proof in criminal law as well, according to your lecture later on. We should keep in mind that till stage 5 there should be an alert driver inside the car, and the advantages of the autonomous car will be reduced in this period. We can think about creating systems of heavy fines and punishments if there are malicious conduct in any offense. As for blaming the robot, the car, the direct liability model that we saw before in the 3 models of Professor Gabriela Levy. If the car, in my opinion, cannot feel or be afraid, almost no rationale of a criminal system can justify punishment. In worst case scenario, the car will be shut down and be given a death penalty, while fixing the problems in other cars as well. That can be explained maybe under the principle of proportionate punishment, to shut down the car that killed somebody else. As for hacking, if there is a proof that system was hacked, the state should prosecute the hacker, and the software designer might be also considered as an offender if he did not use the state-of-the-art security system to protect the car from being hacked, according to the natural and reasonable consequences model as well. As to sum up, I'm just finishing. Okay. So, in order to sum up, in stage 5, it is illogical. Stage 5, the car is by itself. The driver cannot control the car. You will not have a wheel inside the car. You will not have brakes. You won't have anything inside the car. So in stage 5, it is illogical to blame the car owner and the passenger as long as they install all the relevant patches and do not change software or hardware to something that was not verified. The car manufacturer or software company will still be able to prove they acted without criminal intent and without negligence and did everything possible to prevent the offense. In stages 3 and 4, the current criminal system is relevant, assuming that there is a duty for the alert driver to be on board. If the system is hacked, we should prosecute the hacker, and as we saw, we should also prosecute maybe the software company if it did not provide sufficient security. As for the robot, as for the car, I like to talk about the robot and the car, but in worst case scenario, the car will be just shut down and given a death penalty. However, as long as the car cannot feel or be afraid, the basic rationales of criminal system are not met. So I hope that I just was on time.
Yes.
And thank you very much. And if you will have any further questions, I will take them later on, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I invite Karni Chagal. We move on a little bit from the criminal aspect of the topic. We move on to torts. So Karni is a PhD candidate here at Haifa University, but she's also an attorney. She's admitted to the bar in New York, California, and Israel. And she's also founding partner of Flexida, which is a consultancy firm specializing in comparative research related to law and regulations. So, moving on to torts, on the topic of I am an algorithm, not a product, why product liability is not well suited for certain types of algorithms. Please.
Thank you very much, Lilla. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to ask you to move away with me both to torts instead of criminal law, even though the principles would be pretty similar. But I'm also going to ask you to take a journey in time, back in time, because while Kamil and Dalit are dealing with actual concrete solutions for imposing criminal liability, I want to take us back. I'm not going to focus on autonomous car or on specific technologies, but rather in general on how we differentiate between traditional products that cause damage, and the tort legal system has answers for those kinds of damages, and those new sophisticated autonomous or AI systems that ourselves and others say that might warrant a different treatment, a development of a new tort legal system. Now, relying on machines or devices for executing tasks for us is not a new thing. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, machines have been doing physical tasks for us, automation and hard labor tasks. And later on, we've also relinquished other tasks to machines. Computational tasks, computers and calculators have helped us with analyzing data and giving the right answer. And in general, the tort system has answers for damages caused by such machines or devices. We either blame it on the user herself with direct liability negligence, or in case of products, there are different types of products, different types of damages that they cause, we impose liability on the manufacturers. In most countries, there is a product liability regime. It differs from country to country, from state to state, but in general, if we can prove that the product was defected, then the manufacturer or seller are liable for the physical damages that the product caused. Now, as I've said, or as we all know, we now have this concept that AI or autonomous or self-learning systems might warrant some different legal treatment. Why? Because they now do more than physical tasks for us or computational tasks for us. They now replace humans altogether. A car will replace the driver. I don't know if you're familiar with IBM's Ross, the virtual attorney. He's supposed to replace a lawyer. There are now bail algorithms that currently they assist judges in setting bail, but in California, for instance, has just enacted a law that transfers the decision-making power to an algorithm. And the thing is, not only do they replace humans, but they do so in a more and more independent way that is not foreseeable to the programmer. Obviously, the programmer designs how the system will react, and it can set some general boundaries of what the system can never do. But the more advanced these systems become, the less foreseeable their results are. And the whole idea is that they are superior and better than us at discovering patterns and deciding according to them. That we want to relinquish, or we want to pass the decision-making power to them. But as humans, we know less. I mean, we can expect or foresee less the results. And this is why the European Parliament, as well as many scholars, now suggest that such systems, and I deliberately say such systems, which is very general, they are no longer a tool or a product in the hand of a human actor, but rather they are something different, autonomous, independent, and then we should therefore think of a new legal treatment for them. And it really corresponds with the models Dalit show. For instance, we can blame the robot itself, maybe not today, in the future when it has any sort of self-awareness, or according to the suggestion of the European Parliament, even regardless of the level of awareness that the machine has, we should think of a legal status for such robots. There was an interesting talk yesterday about the legal status of machines. And it would be, in a way, responsible for the damages it caused. There are other propositions, to deal with those new types of machines or systems. For instance, no-fault insurance schemes, or there are different analogies between the manufacturer who programmed the system that later on caused damage, and an employer-employee relationship, an agent and principal. Sometimes they speak about parents and children. So there are many different interesting suggestions. In a different article, I suggested some sort of relatively controversial suggestion of applying the reasonable status to algorithms. Check whether or not the decision of the algorithm itself was reasonable, regardless of how it was programmed and whether the human programmer was reasonable. But I do not want to talk about all those today, even though they're super interesting. As I said, I want to take you a little backwards in time, because my question is, how can we tell, as I showed you, as we all know, we've been using systems at, elevated degrees of sophistication for many, many years. So what happened now that we need to maybe consider a change to the tort legal system, or more accurately, how do we know when this is still a traditional, very sophisticated, a traditional product that could be subject to product liability as it has been for years, or it's a new type of system that warrants different legal treatment? And I'll give you the example of autopilots. Autopilots, no doubt, they're very sophisticated. They conduct very complex computational tasks in split seconds. They replace a human pilot, but traditionally they have been subject to product liability. So why is an autonomous car or a medical application, why are they different than the autopilot? And in the literature, it hasn't been addressed yet, but though, including myself, was offered to develop some sort of new tort regime, said we're looking at systems that replace humans, that outperform humans, that are autonomous. These are the ones we should focus on. And when I delved into these definitions, it turns out that all of them relate to different aspects of autonomy. They all have to do with autonomy. So in fact, autonomy, this very vague concept, has been used to distinguish between the traditional products and the ones that deserve new legal treatment. And what I hope to do in the remaining few minutes that I have is convince you why autonomy is not a good classifier between those old traditional systems that could continue to be subject to product liability and the new sophisticated ones, and then offer an alternative purposive analysis approach of classifying between the two. So I see three main problems with using autonomy as a classifier between traditional and advanced sophisticated systems for new legal treatment. First of all, the application of autonomy as a classifier is very, very complex. Why? Because it turns out that not only is autonomy not a yes or no question, not only is it a spectrum, it in fact is a spectrum that comprises of various different vectors that can all go in different ways. For instance, one aspect is whether or not the system is free to act without human involvement. This is the exact spectrum or scale that Dalit presented us. You know, cars that we drive today have no autonomy because we do everything. The futuristic autonomous car will do everything by their own. Will not even perhaps will not even allow any human involvement. Will not notify the user of anything, but will do everything on their own. So they have complete freedom to act. This is one spectrum or one vector of autonomy, but there are more. The system's ability to replace humans is different. There are many different sub-tests that check whether or not it's able or not able to replace humans, but they mainly have to do with whether or not the system adapts to new condition. If the car is on a new terrain that the programmers never thought it would drive on, or there's a new threat that the sensors picked up, whether or not it freezes or it is able to somehow creatively learn from previous instances and do something in order to overcome. And a very simple example is the Roomba cleaning robot that is deliberately designed to overcome obstacles. Something we all know, sometimes it gets stuck on the carpet and that's it. But it's designed with randomness effects and features that enable it to try to overcome little obstacles and move around and clean somewhere else. Yet another vector of autonomy, is the system's level of cognitive awareness. This is a more futuristic element, but the more the system is aware of the consequences of the choices it might make, it's said it is more cognitively aware. Now, not only do automation, not only does it require the combination of all these vectors, but if you think about it, luckily scholars have thought about it, not myself, but the decision-making process, both of persons, humans, and of machines, involve 4 different stages. It's the observing, collecting the data, then assessing the data, deciding upon the data, and then execution. And it turns out that the level of autonomy might be very well different for each of those stages, even if we take the same product. For instance, a drone could be very autonomous in the sense that it is free to act without human involvement when collecting data and when assessing data, of potential threats. But we all know that on the stage of decision-making, a drone has no freedom to act before a human presses the button and confirms, the hit command. So the same system could be very autonomous in certain parts of the decision-making process, but not in others. So I'll do it quickly, but maybe you'll have to take my word that it is indeed very complex to use autonomy. It also gives us very fuzzy results because it's not yes or no questions or give 0 to 10 mark to grade this autonomy level. Rather, the questions that you need to ask, whether the system is tolerant to condition, etc., these are open questions, and it would lead us, to somewhere in between. Even if we found some way to compute in all these different vectors, we would probably not have, okay, so this system is 80% autonomous and this is 60% autonomous. It will be in the gray zone, and then it didn't help us to begin with, because obviously I think we all agree that a coffee machine is not autonomous. And we all agree that if R2-D2 was to walk into the room, it is autonomous, but we are trying to decide on the things in the middle. Lastly, the last problem is even if I was to say, okay, this system is 80% autonomous, So what? Does this mean that product liability cannot efficiently apply to it? I don't know. Maybe product liability is still a good solution for it, even if it is autonomous. So my suggestion has been to go over the rationales of product liability and compare them with very clear yes or no attributes of sophisticated systems that I've identified, and see how the attributes of these systems comply with the rationales of product liability. Because if many of them comply, then maybe we can continue and apply product liability as we always have. But for systems that have features that collide with the rationales of product liability or prevent the fulfillment of them, for those we might need new treatment. And I've identified 8, I'm sure there are more, very specific features of systems that impact the ability to fulfill the rationales of product liability. I'll read them very quickly. Whether or not the success rates of the system are measurables. Is it responsible for committing more than 2 of the decision-making stages I showed you before? Does the system decide independently what type of information it would collect and from which sources? Are these sources dynamic or not? Does it replace professionals in complex fields? Are those life and death decisions? And is real-time answer required? Now, I don't have time to go over all of those, but I'll give maybe one example. A main rationale of product liability is promoting safety. We assume that the manufacturer is best positioned to increase the safety of their products because they know it, because they can run tests and everything. But we assume that the manufacturer has control and foreseeability over their product. And it's true in the case of a coffee machine, though, the manufacturer of a coffee machine, he can tell in advance the dangerous scenarios where damage might be inflicted and prepare for them. But the more unpredictable and less controllable the system is, the less the manufacturer is able to increase the level of safety, and also say, very quickly, and it would be at the expense of the efficacy of the system. Do you still have 2 more minutes?
2, yeah.
2.
Thanks to the previous speakers. You have to thank them.
So I will just say, obviously, if the system, we give it freedom to not only assess the information and decide, but also to decide which sources of information to rely on. Let's take a medical application that has to independently find correlations between patients' data and the optimal treatment. So we can, of course, say, okay, look at his blood type, at his weight, at his prior history of diseases. But we can tell the system, you know what, you can try and find correlations wherever you find fit. And then maybe the system itself will recognize that the day of the week the patient was admitted is very significant when determining whether the treatment would work or not. Maybe, who knows, maybe a certain doctor works that day and he's better than others. So if the manufacturers allows the system more freedom to decide which sources of information to consult with or to rely on, and by the way, also, of course, not only the sources of information, but the parameters that they focus on, obviously the manufacturer has less control and could be less prepared for scenarios of damages, because the system is more free to act on its own. It also applies when the system relies on the wisdom of the crowd. For instance, Waze, the navigation application, it functions based on input from all the drivers. The drivers could game the system. They could deliberately feed it with wrongful information because they want to get to work without traffic and they want to tell everyone, no, this road is blocked when it's not. So it's efficient to use it, but again, the manufacturer is less able to control and foresee the outcome of the system. So this is just one of many examples of how how specific parameters might collide with the rationales of product liability law. I sadly will not give more examples, but the thing is that using these 8 parameters, you have 8 yes or no questions, just a yes or no, and the more yes you say, it turns out that the systems are probably less well suited to be dealt with under product liability law, because the fulfillment of the rationales of product liability law is more problematic. Final slide. To show that this has actual, practical sense, I tried to examine on 4 different systems: the Roomba robot, autopilot, autonomous car, and a futuristic robo-doctor, whether or not these features exist or not. And indeed, luckily, it turns out that a Roomba robot is not. It could continue. It doesn't interfere with the rationales of product liability. None of its parameters. But the more advanced the system become, indeed more parameters exist, and therefore, indeed, we should think of a new, different tort legal system. Thank you, and sorry for taking my time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. And just a note before we move on to the next speaker, I'm speaking to many computer scientists, and having one actually in the room, I have encountered they don't like the idea of the concept of autonomous. So I spent a week with engineers in Pisa this summer who work on robotics, and they said, autonomous? No, we don't want to use that one. We use self-driving cars because autonomous is wrong. And it's the first time I encountered that kind of really strong resistance. So it only shows us that we have to think more about these concepts. But more on this discussion. Now I invite Eduardo Magrani, sorry, interrupted your water break, who joins us from the Institute for Internet and Society of Rio de Janeiro. He has a PhD, and he's actually the coordinator of the institute. And in addition, he's also senior fellow, former fellow at the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society in Berlin. Many interesting titles I read of him, including Professor of Law and Technology, but something that struck me very interestingly from your profile is that he has been involved in many discussions about internet regulation in Brazil, and is one of the developers of Brazil's first comprehensive internet legislation, Brazil's Internet Bill of Rights. So, very interesting, and I give you the floor on the topic of governance of Internet of Things and ethics of AI.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I'm very happy to be here. Congratulations for the previous presentations, absolutely fantastic. I'll try to make my presentation good and short, and if it's very short, it doesn't need to be good at all. So I'm also a teacher of intellectual property and law and technology in Brazil at FGV, IBMEC, and PUC University, former fellow at Humboldt, and coordinator of ITS Rio. So first to start, because we don't have much time, we are already living in this Internet of Things era, which connects to a new wave of the web, which is the 3.0 wave, where machines starts to feed platforms also, alongside with humans. On this Internet of Things scenario, we have a great combo between big data, connectivity, algorithms, cloud, sensors, and more artificial intelligence. That's why I think the IoT debate connects a lot to the AI debate. We are living then in a world of data based on a symbiotic human-machine interaction. And I think my talk connects a lot to the previous talks also. So this is us nowadays, where we don't have a clue of how our data is being processed, treated, and transferred to third parties. The rule of law is not prepared for that, and neither democracy. And that's why I think my talk connects a lot to what you were saying. We have robots interacting with us all the time for political purposes or for private purpose in our personal lives. And we sometimes don't know when we are interacting with human beings, when we are interacting with algorithms, sensors, and this can impact a lot, not only our daily lives, but also our democracy system. And talking about that, let me bring you to the Brazilian context a little bit to try to add something new to what we are saying here. If we are already living a hyperconnectivity scenario, we still face a serious challenge of digital divide. Half of the population don't have internet access, which is already considered a human right, by the UN, and in Brazil, only 66% of the population is connected to the internet, which is an urgency in Brazil. And from that amount, 62% are connected to social networks. And we are considered to be heavy users of that. Almost the entire population of internet users in Brazil are also Facebook users, are also Instagram users. And they spend around 4 hours per day on Instagram, which is not something not to be considered. And this is a research from last year. They asked Brazilian internet users what is the difference between Facebook and the internet, and the majority said that Facebook is the internet, which is a grave ignorance, because it brings us to a democratic problem. Because if the majority of internet users in Brazil consider that Facebook is the same thing that the internet, they don't know how they can be jeopardized by that because of the filter bubble effect. Many young people are only getting informed through social networks in Brazil, only informed by Facebook, Instagram, and Google search and so on. And they don't know that the content they are accessing are only content that the algorithms suggest for them based on tracking and micro profiling. And it's harder and harder to get away of this filter bubble, because you know the publicity that those platforms monetize content. So this filter bubble is very interesting from the commercial point of view, but the users, and at least in Brazil, they don't know about this effect. That's why I think this can generate a democratic issue. This is a very interesting equation that we just faced in Brazil. That is the combo between big data, which is always big personal data, misinformation, and now bots acting on the connected public sphere can bring us to a hackable democracy. We just faced this process of this equation last month in Brazil, and it's happening worldwide. We saw what happened with Donald Trump, with Brexit, how the algorithms are becoming more and more sophisticated, processing our big data for the purpose of political manipulation. So we were following this world debate and the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Some companies prepared themselves for that. So for instance, in Brazil, Facebook tried to extinguish many fake news pages. But in Brazil, the trigger was not on Facebook, such as in the US or some other countries in Europe. The trigger was on WhatsApp, which is a little bit more complex because it's not a social network itself. We can question that. It's an instant messaging platform only with your family and people you trust, but people that doesn't separate fake news from real news, almost your aunt or your grandma. So this debate came very seriously in Brazil, bringing us this equation on big personal data, algorithms, and bots, misinformation and bots. Fake news like this one created a huge fuss on Brazilian citizens and Brazilian politics. Our next president that just got elected, which is Bolsonaro, you may heard about him, I don't know what you heard about him, but this fake news got a very serious repercussion because he got stabbed on the belly, and some people still believe that the aggressor of Bolsonaro was in this photo on an event with Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. They did the Photoshop here, which is not indeed a good one, putting the aggressor guy here alongside with Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. So this kind of fake news produces material discourse on the political narrative in Brazil, and people still believe this is true, and this is not even a good remix, right? We could say that almost all political parties in Brazil nowadays are investing in bots and fake news. Me, myself, I capacitate some of the politicians. My presentation is divided in two parts. The first part explaining how it works, the next part trying to explain how you shouldn't do that because it's not democratically nice to people. They're all investing in astroturfing because it's being very interesting to manipulate people. They really can do that. So people are interacting more and more with bots online, on Facebook, on Twitter, and they don't know when they are interacting with human beings and or with bots. The political party this year in Brazil spent more than $10 million in astroturfing, which is a lot, to send 2 messages per second on social networks. No human being can do that. And why they want to do that? To increase the range on social networks filter bubbles. Since we're living in this world of filter bubbles, it can increase a lot this effect. And this is a brand new research in Brazil from DAPP on FGV that stated that 20% of all the political debate in Brazil is already being produced by bots, by non-human agents. And 20% seems a lot to me, right? Okay, so we came to this because of this equation and these facts I'm showing to you, or maybe this, where he tries to convince a little child to hold a weapon, trying to teach her that, and she's not even his child. Okay, and law couldn't hold this effect back. Law was not prepared to capacitate people against fake news effects, against filter bubbles and bots. Which brings me to the next part of my presentation, where we have a serious research problem. We have new friends on the connected public sphere interacting with us all the time. And we need now to understand and map these non-human agents acting on the connected public sphere, because law is not prepared for that. Why? To comprehend how exactly they influence our behavior, including on democratic processes, and how to think on liability issues. These technical artifacts and social technical systems are becoming more autonomous, and thanks to you we know more about autonomy now, less predictable, and bringing unexpected behavior, sometimes bringing a behavior that was not intended by the programmers, intended by the software engineers, by machine learning, deep learning, and neural network techniques. Of course, we can remind ourselves of the Thai experiment, with I consider that all of you know about the Thai experiment, where this robot with deep learning technique became fascist, nazist, and discriminatory in less than 24 hours, interacting with people on Twitter. And we are coming from a narrow AI scenario to a more strong AI scenario, more and more, right? We may not be there yet, but we are going towards this direction, and it's very hard to stop the advancement of technology. The question really will be, who is going to be responsible when an intelligent robot with deep learning and neural networks techniques start to produce damage? For example, being discriminatory on the connected public sphere on Twitter, for instance, and how to regulate on that. And we count on you on that too, right? Which brings me to my third part. The rule of law must adapt a little bit. We are regulated by architecture. We are already regulated by design of those algorithms, by the design of those platforms, which reminds us of Lawrence Lessig's lessons about this techno-regulated scenario. Architecture, design, algorithms, and robots have a use plan and a function. Therefore, natural persons, the programs, the software engineers, they did moral and ethical inputs on the development of those technical artifacts. So they are not neutral at all. They have an intrinsic moral on them. In this scenario of moral machines, moral artifacts, rule of law must adapt a little bit. We have to create value-sensitive design to try to regulate better in this first instance, regulate things by design. We're talking a lot worldwide about privacy by design. This is on GDPR, this is on the brand new Brazilian General Data Protection Bill, and this is extremely important. Tell a smart robot, since you eat our data, what are your alimentary restrictions? And many of those alimentary restrictions are on those bills, those privacy bills. When the GDPR talks about data minimization, this is one kind of alimentary restriction for intelligent bots, since they eat our personal data. And the principle of privacy by design is capable of reducing many of the abuses we see nowadays. This is one guideline created by Microsoft, stating the importance of fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency and accountability, which are human values that we can insert on the design phase of the development of those technologies, trying to avoid many of the abuses we see. We also can think about security by design. There's a huge discussion now about smart weapons, where we can insert a chip, an intelligent sensor on the weapon, and it will not shoot outside the hand of the owner of this weapon. In Brazil, we will face this discussion, and many weapons of Brazilian policemen, of militaries, are now in the hands of criminals. So this is one good example of security by design. I'm building, alongside with Mozilla, a new project called the IoT Trust Mark, or the Trustable Technology Mark, where companies, startups can apply to have a trust mark on their products, stating that they have privacy, transparency, security, stability, and openness by design. This is a bottom-up experience, not only top-down by law, but also an interesting bottom-up initiative. This project is going to be launched next week. So those of you who want to join this initiative to become launch partners, you're already invited. You can send me afterwards an email. You still have time this week. I think it's a brilliant initiative of Mozilla. Companies can fill this form, which is very easy to fill, and some experts will attest if you are in those principles, those guidelines or not, and you can earn this IoT Trust Mark to communicate there to your consumers, which is very nice. And also, we can think about ethics by design. We think a lot about privacy and security, but not much about ethics. And of course, we can insert ethical values on the design phase. And there's a very interesting case concerning domestic bots. Many people have Google Homes or Alexa from Amazon, and there is a new research saying that children are being unpolite because they are seeing how their parents interact with the domestic bots. And how do we interact? In a very mandatory, in a very imperative way. Alexa, play Frank Sinatra. Alexa, turn off the lights. And children are becoming to see that and communicate in the same imperative way with their parents. So, mom, play that thing, and etc. Becoming less polite. Amazon starts, I'm going to the final part. So Alexa starts to build an ethical by design initiative with the so-called politeness feature, which has been branded the magic word for Alexa. Encourages children to say please and thank you by acknowledging the use of the terms. So for example, if the child asks, what will be the weather today? Please, Alexa, add to its response, thanks for asking so nicely. So helping the parents to educate their children. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is ethics by design, right? So I think the most complex topics we have to discuss now is if we're going to need a new legal status, a new personhood for intelligent robots, for really autonomous technical artifacts or not, and if democracy itself is prepared to this whole automation scenario. So thank you very much. These are my contacts, and I'll be glad to debate with you about this.
Thank you very much. And I just passing on to our next speaker, I have 2 remarks to make. Actually, it's very interesting you mentioned the security by design aspect, because we talk a lot about self-driving cars and so on, but actually the weapons industry is very, very prominent in this field as well, and I guess we do not talk as much about it. And very nicely, smoothly introducing actually at the end of your talk our next speaker's profile. I have the pleasure to present to you Christoph Lutz, who comes from the Nordic Center for Internet and Society. He has, again, a very mixed and interesting profile from sociology, and he also has a PhD in management. He's an associate professor at the center, and he's going to talk to us about the ethical, legal, and social issues of social robots and findings from expert workshops. So, very much looking forward to your talk, and please give us 15 minutes.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here. As said before, I'm a member of the Nordic Center for Internet and Society. My colleague Elian, who some of you might have met yesterday and seen, is also part of our research group. And we are very interested in the transformation of work in that setting. So our approach to algorithms and AI is very much from a work, business and economic perspective. And my talk today will also go a little bit in that direction. So as you know, and as you've heard throughout the different talks and sessions yesterday and today, AI and social robots come with many different opportunities and challenges. I'm going to be focusing mostly on social robots, so really physical systems, robots, tangible systems. One thing that we see when it comes to the opportunities is that social robots enable especially elderly people and children to bond with the technology and to become more socially engaged in some ways. So these technologies have shown to be effective in overcoming or helping with autism or with dementia, so with different types of diseases that people suffer from. Then on the challenges side, we've heard a lot about privacy, social robots or intelligent systems, and smart speakers like Amazon's Echo are employed at home. They listen to you, they collect a lot of sensitive personal data, so there's a strong challenge, there's a strong threat of people's privacy. We also see, this is a different example, this is a robot called Theo, which is employed with children, also helping them to, especially children on the autism spectrum, helping to cope with these issues. So you see many of them do have animal-like shapes, many of them have human shapes, some are in between. But we are really interested in the social robots, so robots that interact with people rather than industrial robots that are used in manufacturing. So for us, the interest is very strongly in the social side. And finally, debate that is very strong in the media, and that you will see a lot written and talked about, is the whole discussion whether AI and robots are replacing human work, whether we will become obsolete in the future. There is a lot of hype and really pessimistic scenarios in the media, but at the same time other studies are saying that it's not going to be so serious, because even with the emergence of intelligent systems and robots, new jobs are going to be created. So you see, this is the field that we are embedding ourselves in. There are a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities. And we, together with 2 colleagues, with Eduardo, who's currently in the different In the other session, presenting a different paper, we were trying to actually engage the community on these questions. So we were trying to organize workshops, really get people talking, what they think, what their perspectives are. So over the course of 2 years, we organized 4 workshops, 3 of them in 2016 and 2017. One was already in 2015, and these were robotics conferences. The one that we draw very strongly on, it was organized at New Friends, which is a relatively new but very good conference on robots, social robots that interact with children and with elderly people, so especially focusing on therapy and education. And that workshop took place 2 years ago in Barcelona. And then we also had a workshop in Japan. The Japanese Society for Artificial Intelligence organizes a conference every year, which is called the ISAI, the International Symposia on Artificial Intelligence. And that took place in Yokohama in 2016. And we also had a workshop there. And finally, in 2017, we had a workshop at the European Robotics Forum, which is one of the major outlets and conferences in Europe about robotics. Throughout these workshops, the focus, as I said, was really on the ethical, legal, and social aspects. We had a call for papers where we stressed mainly 3 different aspects, or 3 core aspects within that broad field of PLS. The first one was on dignity and ethics. The second one was privacy, so we are both, all of us, the 3 of us that are involved in that research are very interested in privacy as a research topic. And finally, we were also interested in questions of liability, which ties very nicely to previous talks we heard here. We also worked with case studies in the workshops, so the participants were given 3 different cases that they had to go through and study. Then many of the discussions were actually based on these 3 case studies. If you're interested really in the workshops and want to read more, I recommend you to go on our website. It's called Legal Aspects of Social Robots, and you will find a bit more information there as well. All the workshops we try to record, or try to gather some information. In Barcelona we had a video of the participants and of all the proceedings. We also had audio documents in Japan, and the ERF we took notes. We worked a lot with different sticky notes and tried to really have ideation so that people were not only talking but also standing up, moving around, and being really engaged. We took some pictures as well, as you see here. This is from Europe. This is from the New Friends conference in Barcelona, and it was really nice to be there. So we actually had about 45 participants all together throughout these different workshops. It varied a bit depending on which workshop. But as you see here, a lot of them came from engineering backgrounds, so these were really roboticists who worked in developing the technology. But then the second biggest group was people with a law background. So we saw a very interdisciplinary field of participants. Also the countries were very varied. Actually quite a lot of the participants are based in Southern Europe, in Spain, in Italy and in Greece, due to the workshop in Barcelona, but then also from Eastern Asia, in Japan and Korea. So you see we really also had a broad sample here. But now I will really talk for the rest of the talk more about the content of the workshops, what people talked about, and what the key findings are. So we actually identified 5 challenges, and for each challenge we also try to engage the participants in talking about recommendations of what can we do to overcome some of these challenges, what are maybe potential solutions. So I will go through these and talk more about the different aspects of each of these major and larger challenges. So the first one, privacy, maybe not surprising because the call for papers was also having privacy as an important research topic, but many of the researchers were talking about data protection and privacy anyways. And here, when it comes to robots, of course, there's a lot of discussion about the surveillance, that robots are employed at home, private personal settings, which is normally a secure and safe place. So they have access to rooms that the other technologies might not necessarily have access to. Vulnerabilities in terms of security were mentioned. The robots can be hacked, especially if they are not really developed with a huge budget in mind and with a lot of money for security. But then when it came to smaller aspects, the participants were really focusing on the issue that there's not really a privacy or a common understanding, because there are so different communities involved in that dialogue and debate. It's hard to find a common understanding of privacy, what it means, what it entails. Control and consent were mentioned throughout, with robots that are kind of different from a website or from a social media platform. You have a lot of written information on the terms and conditions. It's more difficult to establish consent. Especially this is the case when you have robots interacting with more than one person, so in group settings. If you think about schools, where robots are sometimes employed to help the teacher with different tasks, the robot has to act or interact often with more than one student, which might make it very tricky to establish informed consent. And recommendations were actually going quite strongly in the direction of the GDPR, even though the GDPR was not yet in place at that time. So they were talking about data minimization and purpose limitation of data collection. Dynamic consent was mentioned as a more technological solution. The robot has to ask for permission for different things, not just at the beginning, but throughout, at different points in time. The right to explanation, or the so-called right to explanation, came up because the robot communicates, or the robot could communicate what type of data it collects. It could also maybe try to explain what it does if you ask it. And finally, empowerment was seen as the powerful means. So this is going into literacy and education direction. The second one was connected to legal uncertainty. This is more strongly the field of Aurelia and Eduardo, the two co-authors, so we'll go through that very quickly. So with robots, as we've seen, also autonomous vehicles, there is actually not a very clear legal application, and the laws, we can actually apply different laws. We heard a lot about the liability, about product safety laws. So depending on which field the robot is employed, we could argue for different laws that apply. Then again, cultural differences might make this very tricky, because we do have different cultural understandings, what robots do and what they should mean. And for healthcare robots, certification was mentioned as an issue. Could these actually be certified? Regulation by design, it's quite nice that we heard that in the previous talk, because there was also something that the participants discussed. In Japan, there was the discussion about toku zones. These are living labs, so controlled but relatively large environments where technology is tested in situ. So that means that people can actually do natural experiments, real-life experience, and see how policies will apply and work. And the government robot agency came up. This is something Ryan Calo and other lawyers have actually discussed in the US. Risk-based approaches is something that the European Commission is discussing at the moment. The third one is related to autonomy in the agency, also something we've heard a lot about in this session, so I can try to go over it quite quickly. So the moral responsibility and the legal status of robots is not very clear in any case. So should we assign these robots same features like an animal, as a company, or as a new type of entity? So people were talking about that in different terms. There was no clear consensus on that matter, how we should actually treat robots in terms of the legal status. What came up was that we should have much clearer decision-making rules, dispute resolution mechanisms, especially in institutions such as hospitals. Compensation funds were mentioned as an approach to solving liability issues. Also distributed liability, that not only one actor is responsible for damage that occurs, the liability might be distributed over different actors. and also that we need maybe new infrastructures. The fourth topic, this is related to the debate I was mentioning in the beginning about the replacement of jobs, about how robots are, how automation might take over different professions. And here, especially in healthcare, there was a bit of a concern because, I mean, robots at this point, many experts don't see that happening in the short term, that robots are taking over caregiver responsibilities. But for cognitive therapies, for example, robots might be employed. And actually the engineers and the experts saw it a bit problematic that the discourse is so strongly going into the hype scenario that robots are taking over our jobs. So the public and media discourse is somehow detached from the economic and empirical reality. And in certain contexts, it was also mentioned that robots might be strengthening anti-immigration sentiments because they are replacing those skilled workers in some contexts. Solutions, participatory design, that we should include as many different groups in the design process as possible. In Japan, there was the PRETEPS project was mentioned. This is a large-scale project developing a platform for robotic applications and developments where users can actually relatively easily deploy modules for robots and program them, keeping humans in the loop. I have to wrap up, so I'm going to go over this quite quickly. The last point that came up a lot was the discussion about human-human interaction being replaced. The robots are phasing out social contact. Bias and discrimination was one aspect. But here, again, the human in the loop. We need to keep having humans involved. And human-centered design as well. So this is the last slide. Just to summarize what we saw across these different challenges, the 5 challenges I mentioned, we can roughly divide them into 3 groups. Maybe legal approaches and solutions, such as dynamic consent or regulation. Technological solutions were seen as quite promising. We heard about the privacy by design or regulation by design approaches. And here also the living labs approach in Japan was something that we actually didn't expect and was nice to hear about. And finally, social solutions or recommendations include literacy for users, but also interdisciplinary collaboration. So ideally, the best approach, we would say, is to try and combine the legal, technological, and social recommendations and solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christoph. I would like to now invite all the speakers, all the panelists, so we can open the floor for discussion. Social robots are extremely interesting, and again, during that 1 week I spent with all these computer scientists in Pisa in Italy. There is also a university there, and they used different social robots in PhD student situations. So they put one social robot, it was Ibok, the dog bot, it was really a social robot, in a room with PhD students who were actually finishing their work. So they were extremely stressed, extremely nervous, like very, very angry all the time. And the dog at the end of the week was depressed. It was very, very sad. And then they put another one with first-year PhD students, super passionate, very open to research, to innovate, to dive into these new topics. The dog at the end was very happy, and we could see both of these dogs and these social robots one next to another, and you could clearly see this interaction, what kind of an impact it had. Then I have read about many EU-funded projects actually on social robots that try to make them more polite, and this social aspect is more emphasized. Now, the floor is yours. To the audience, we have, I think, in theory 15 more minutes, but since we started late, let's say half an hour for discussion, unless somebody comes and tells us to stop. Please. Yes, Felix.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Felix. Thank you for the presentation. I think the presentations actually did wonderfully well. I just have a question on, okay, you said we should not call it autonomous vehicle again. Okay, let's say self-driving cars. In determining the question of reliability, I think one of the modes you suggested was direct reliability for the vehicle or the robot. Now, would that not mean ascribing legal personality to the vehicle indirectly, if that option is to be taken? That's the first question. Now, secondly, if the vehicle is to be responsible by punishing the vehicle for the crime committed, can the vehicle also raise the defense of, let's say, defense of insanity under criminal law if the software involved in installing the vehicle was actually attacked by virus? I'm just thinking, so would the defense of insanity or probably heart of God not be applicable in such situation?
Yes, let's collect a few questions and then we get back to them. More questions?
I have a question for Karni. These 8 criteria, did you develop them yourself or did you formulate them yourself? And how then, for example, did you work on that, how an idea could work for more autonomous systems where the criteria would not apply and you would say, okay, maybe not autonomy because you're speaking the whole time, okay, do not focus on that, but how this then applies, not product liability then, new laws, but what kind of new laws, for example. And another question for Eduardo, how would, because in the past people were very concentrated on media controlled by the state, and there was a lot of controversy around it too, the state manipulates our opinion and certain groups and lobbies faking videos, not with the modern terms, but even of faking news articles. And now it seems like not a lot has changed. On the media has been manipulated again, but yeah, is there any shifting? Now it happens in a more sophisticated way so that we can truly cannot tell the differences. So what would be the solution? You have to fly to the country to see for yourself what's happening there. Or
any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question for the whole panel, but I think it started with some of the, it's a slide that you showed, Eduardo, the IBM principles. So my first question is if you can reiterate these principles again. And also for the entire panel, are there perhaps other principles? Are there some overlaps between the principles? And is there a hierarchy? Perhaps safety first, accessibility second, or any consideration of how to apply this in practical matter?
I think we can answer these and then we take another round. So, the first question came from you.
Yes, maybe. Well, if you want.
No?
As for punishing the car or the robot, if we go back to the basic principles of criminal law, there is no rationale to just punish the robot right now. But if we talk in a very utopic world, when the robot will have self-awareness or something like that, maybe then we can talk about punishing the robot, because if you put the robot inside jail, for example, all the other robots will not learn from this act of putting somebody to jail. You want to punish him and to show the others don't do that, because otherwise you'll go to jail. And if the robots can understand that, there is no rationale to put them there. So in the meantime, we're not talking of blaming the car or the robot, because there is no rationale to do that according to the basic principles of criminal law, in my opinion. So
according to say almost the same, but according to the classic criminal law, we have to have some moral agent to be responsible for the action. So there is no sense to talking about punishing robot if the robot itself is not understanding what is good, what is wrong, and what he's doing, and there is no sense to punish him if the punishment could not change his behavior or something like that. So that discussion now it's has no sense. It's not rational. But from the other perspective, we had a lot of symbolic aspects in the criminal law. And before the Middle Ages, we even tried to punish animals for doing some bad things. So, for example, pigs who destroyed some foods were put into the court and punished for their action. So maybe in the between there will be some need to point out on someone that robot is punished. It will be not rational from the perspective of criminal law, but maybe it will be give some relief to the public that there is someone or something which is responsible for some evil which happened. So maybe it's my response.
I agree with you 100%. But you know, AI is still a work in progress. We are just simply theorizing and thinking about what would be the possibility in each situation. Now, if you also consider the issue of software, now we all agree that it doesn't make sense for us to punish the robot because the robot actually is not a real agent. And one of the intentions of criminal law is not just to punish, but also to ensure deterrence and of course to make a sample of people so that at least others will not do the same thing. Now, but when you consider the company that produces the software that works with the self-driving car, now if the software is affected by violence, will the company will still be responsible? Because in such instance, when you place it within the context of classical criminal law, that will be similar to a situation of act of God, a force major situation, or probably can the plea of insanity be applicable in such situation? Because the link is actually broken. There's actually an intervening situation which breaks the chain of liability, which of course ordinarily should be ascribed to the company responsible for developing the software. Do you understand me?
Of course. Yes, yes. I don't think that we have to go to the insanity paradigm, but we can go to the hacking paradigm that I suggested before. And if you can prove that somebody hacked your system, the hacker should be the blame one, should be prosecuted by the state. And you can also prosecute the software programmer if he didn't give the sufficient security that was needed to give into this car. And that is my answer, because insanity, I can't think about the paradigm of insanity of a robot, but you can think about the hacker that puts the virus inside the car or something.
Maybe if there is something like a glitch in the system, maybe then we can think of insanity, because that's an interesting idea. If there's no hacker, but it's just down to a technical,
so
some glitch or electrical problem with the wire.
But in this case, we can go to the third model of the reasonable and natural consequences of your act. If the programmer should have seen this glitch of the software, you can blame the programmer and not the robot again.
There are some views about how to deal with some crash and glitches in the robot, but we will in the future treat that crashes like a natural disaster, that like striking or something like that. As to me, they will be part of the nature, and we will not have to treat it like some legal fact. We have to put the blame on someone. We have to just used to it that something it will happen, and nobody will be responsible for that.
We have a question from Anna.
It's actually two questions. The first one, a very good methodological question of how I identified the 8 parameters. What I did in the article, I chose 2 sets of examples of traditional systems and similar advanced systems. One is a traditional GPS, you know, that the manufacturer uploaded the maps and that's it, versus ways that relies on the wisdom of the crowd and is learning as it goes. And a traditional radiation therapy machine. Back in the 80s, there was a tragedy of the Therac 25 radiation therapy that gave overdosage of radiation because some sort of a bug in the system where very certain conditions occurred. Then instead of giving the right administration, it gave an overdose. This is I mean, it was a sophisticated system, but traditional. It wasn't a self-learning system. And a similar radiation system that is not yet in existence but is in development, whereas it doesn't only administer the dosage more accurately, but also it decides, instead of the person or the physician or the technician, how much to administer and at which. So it does make the decision making itself. And what I did for both of those sets, I went over the OODA loop, the 4 stages of decision making, and sought differences of different features of traditional versus advanced, and this is how I identified the 8 features. But as I said, I don't think it's a conclusive list. I'm sure maybe not all 8 parameters are good, maybe some do not make sense after all, and I'm sure more could be added. But I think it gives a direction of, a tool of how to separate between the traditional and the new. And to your second question, okay, so let's say we know these are systems that warrant different legal provision. What do we do with them? I must admit that intuitively, even though I have not written about it, I think I'm inclined to the no-fault insurance scheme. I think it's very practical, but the other article I wrote as part of the PhD, it has to do with what you said on the glitch of the system just now. I think that systems that replace human beings, as we today and even more so in the future, in the eyes of the victims for sure, but also maybe in the eyes of the other parties involved, they should be treated as a person, meaning that even if in the end the manufacturer would be liable to pay for the damages they cause, they should be subject to the reasonableness standard. Meaning, if the system had a glitch, we will check its exact decision, not how it was programmed by the programmer generally, but the specific decision. If it was reasonable, okay, no fault. If it was not reasonable, then the manufacturer could pay, just as if a physician was not reasonable and the hospital will pay.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. So even if it was not reasonable, but there was no fault on the side of the manufacturer, but he would pay so that the public does not feel like there is injustice.
If it was not reasonable, then even at the previous article I showed why the reasonableness of the algorithm, usually it's parallel to the reasonableness of the manufacturer, but not necessarily. So even if the algorithm was not reasonable, but the programmer was reasonable, it doesn't matter. The hospital could be okay, guide the doctor, but still the doctor would be unreasonable, the hospital would still pay. So the same for an algorithm.
Thank you.
And we actually had the last question not answered.
I'll try to tackle actually two
and then
questions.
We take another two questions, and then we take another round.
The first question you asked, and I think you yourself answered the question, but I'll try to explore a little bit more, right? Of course, we always had misinformation, manipulation, and also fake news from newspapers, from governments. But agreeing with him, I think what we have now is a gain of scale, because the algorithms are very sophisticated. The big data we generate all the time creates an even tougher scenario of political and social manipulation. We can remember what happened worldwide with Cambridge Analytica scandals. What happened was not only they could manipulate people, but the big data was so intense that the Cambridge Analytica knew what were the fears of each person, and they knew how much posts they could send to one specific person until convince this person to vote in some candidate.
And that is what I mean by game of scale.
Yes.
This is brand new because of the sophistication of the algorithms and processing all our big data. Although we always had misinformation and fake news, I think this is brand new. And the law is not prepared for that, and neither democracy. That's my statement. So we need to prepare institutions for that. For instance, in Brazil, I help capacitating policymakers. And many of them don't have a clue on how filter bubble works, on how, and what even is an algorithm. So it's an urgency to capacitate policymakers and political institutions to deal with those new challenges. This game of scale, right? This is my opinion.
How can you capacitate them?
Digital education.
Yeah.
Digital education. What is an online platform? How does the timeline of my Facebook works with algorithms suggesting content just for me, Eduardo Magrani, not for my entire list of friends and things like that. So I would say digital education is this first brick we need to build now in different countries.
Nice.
At least on my country. And you said, do we have to fly in our country? I would say yes, because we do not have fake news. We have nice beaches also. So. And sorry. No. Can I just tackle
yes, I was
the second?
gonna remind that we have one.
So about the second question, I was asking what were the principles. So Microsoft launched this guideline, which is fairness, reliability, safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency and accountability. And you made a very important question, very interesting one. There is no hierarchy between those principles. Some of them reminds us of some other guidelines. For example, GDPR brings many of those principles.
What's GDPR?
GDPR, the European Regulation for Data Protection. So many of those principles are already introduced in new regulations such as the European General Data Protection Bill. But I would like to highlight two interesting principles. The first one, inclusiveness. Since we are dealing all the time with regulation by design, regulation by platform, regulation by algorithms in our lives, we need to know how those black boxes are working. This is not my phrase. Frank Pasquale had a book that is entitled The Black Box Society. Yuval Noah Harari, the author of Sapiens Homo Deus, says about that all the time, that we just created a new God with this data. So dataism algorithms are governing our lives more and more. And we need to know how exactly they are doing that, how they are taking decisions on our behalf, right? And to do that, we need, first of all, transparency and inclusiveness. And those are the two principles I would like to highlight, because we see many discriminations coming from algorithms that could be avoided if the design phase could include minorities, could include more people, not to be discriminatory with women or black people and so on. So we need to be more inclusive on the design phase, on the engineering phase.
And data training phase also.
Huh?
The data training phase is
The
very
data
important.
training phase, exactly. So I would say inclusive engineering is very important for us from now on. It will bring us to a scenario where society must be more aware of the work of engineers. So that's my point. And transparency also. We talk a lot about right to explanation. We need to know how those black boxes, how those algorithms are working. So explainable technology is another interesting principle I would like to highlight. So jump in.
Sometimes transparency is very difficult to explain because you know how you just write the code, but later on to explain what it does.
Deep learning, how the algorithm took this decision.
Transparency is very nice, and I just say it myself, but it's very difficult to implement.
It's more and more difficult, but I would say it's important.
Yes. Haifa.
I think sorry if I jump in. But I think these values are very Western-centric. They are basically imposing a very Western view of what a good system should be like. For example, privacy. We know that different cultures have very different privacy approaches, and in other cultures maybe well-being or happiness or different values might be important. So I think it would be nice to actually get more inclusiveness into these principles.
Yeah, so
We have two more questions, yes, and then Elder.
So I have two small comments. First one about this inclusivity. So let's imagine an artificial intelligence systems in China that include Tibetan people. It's impossible because of the Chinese law. Also on that note, Stack Overflow has prepared a huge developer study based on 100,000 responses from developers, and 5% of them declare that they would be willing to write unethical code just because for the money. So we also need to, I think, work on the educational side, also on the developer side, because they also need to understand what inclusivity means, what transparency means, why is it important, who needs to know what exactly in the main system. And the second comment would be about the Kamil's speech, because I think that we have just with this panel solved the trolley problem. So the basic assumption of the MIT Moral Machine project was Iyad Rahman's project that started with questioning people about what sort of decisions should one make, like should it swerve or should it not swerve, how many people should die, etc. Of course, the result was that people preferred that less people were killed in the crash. But when they were asked if they were willing to buy this sort of car with this ethical and moral like agency implemented, they would say no. I prefer cars that protect me, not the others. So, having said that, and having said what you said about the criminal law that says that it's okay for the person to protect himself or herself, this means that probably the car industry will implement such moral decisions that will protect only the person inside the car. So I think we've just solved the problem. It will not protect anybody outside of the car, which is also sad.
Can we take the comment from Elder? And then we
it's just a quick note on the rationales of criminal law because of the discussion we just had. And first of all, bear in mind that deterrence is only one prong of 5 different elements of criminal law. And here, if you take autonomous cars, for example, you might say that incapacitation would be probably the rationale that you use, try to remove the harm. Retribution could be debatable whether or not we can really use just desert for that. But it's important to know that it's not only putting someone to jail that everyone will learn about it. There are other rationales. We have to, however, bear in mind that they do apply on human conduct for a reason, because criminal law works like that. So we look at the criminalization process, and you might fulfill some of the requirements, nil harm requirements, etc., but they might not pass along the way. Just to note on what Felix said, I think that that's an interesting idea. I would go, if I use a defense in criminal law, I would go to automatism and not insanity, because there's something that in the automated system which might have happened because of a hack or a virus, but that I think fits more, and that would be a highly interesting question, I think, in general, just to know.
Can I just jump into the question? So, what you said is very important. Of course, programs can develop unethical technologies, and it's happening. How can we solve that? By regulating by design, ethics by design, and those guidelines, those principles we were talking about, so safety, security, inclusiveness, accountability, this can reduce this kind of unethical development. But it's true, it happens. In Brazil, for example, I was talking to some programmers, and they said when they develop chatbots, some clients ask for them to make the chatbot mistake some words to emulate a natural person, because the bots, they are having a better Portuguese than the Brazilians natural persons. So society must discuss those ethical guidelines. Do we want to know when we are interacting with bots and when we are interacting with human beings? So this is an open debate.
one sentence and then.
Okay,
please.
Just one sentence, very quick sentence. The car manufacturers are dealing with this dilemma, whether to tell the people what was the decision, whom to kill or not to kill. And I think that one manufacturer just said that they are just leaving it to 50% and that's it, so you can play with it. Chance, yes. But it's very interesting question, and for Eldor's comment, thank you. But if you heard my speech, I suggested the death penalty for the car, just to show the others that something is done, as Kamil said before, and all the other rationales are not met with the law.
I think with that we can close our discussion, but you're more than welcome to carry it over to the coffee break. And thank you very much once more. It's been a pleasure. And
thank you, Alina.
Thank
you. Okay, everybody, we are going back upstairs to the 29th floor for a coffee break.